Welcome to part 4 of our series on non-covered pensions. I'm Matt Johnson with Social Security Education Center. Today, we're talking again about that windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset, everybody's favorite topic about Social Security. But specifically, we're going to dive into, hey, what's the history of this? What's the legislation that's out there, and is there any way around it? So that is what we're going over today in part 4. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit first about the history of the WEP and the GPO. So the WEP, the windfall elimination provision, let's start with that first, came about in 1983. Now remember, windfall elimination provision means your individual work record, okay? Whereas GPO is off of a spousal benefit or survivor benefit. Windfall elimination provision, we're talking about your own benefits. The reason this came about was, if you take a step back, Social Security is designed to really help those lower income earners, okay? So the lower your income, the greater percent of your income counts toward your eventual Social Security benefit. So as you earn more income, less and less of that drives how much you will get from a Social Security standpoint. It's the way they have the calculation set up. So from the government standpoint, now I'm not saying anything of what I believe here, but this is their rationale. Their rationale is if you are, let's say you have a pretty decent income earner who works a state job, an administrator at a high school or something, and makes a good salary, has a good pension from the state. Well, if that individual worked 10 to 12 years just part-time paying into Social Security, for that little amount of work, they'd have a decent Social Security benefit, which would be equal to a lower income earner who was only working for Social Security. So the rationale was, hey, we don't want those medium to higher income earners with the government to be able to double up and also get that Social Security. That's the rationale, not saying it's right, but that is the rationale, okay? Now the government pension offset came about in 1977. And the reason behind this was, when you have a couple that is only on Social Security and one of them passes away, well, now the lower benefit will drop off and the surviving spouse will just take over wherever the higher benefit was. So they're left with one benefit. And the idea behind the GPO was, we don't want a surviving spouse to be able to collect the survivor benefit from Social Security and also collect their full amount from the non-covered state pension, right? That government pension. And so the idea is they would be doubling up. Do I agree with it? No. But that is the rationale behind why the government thought it was a good idea to bring in the government pension offset. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of background on both the WEP and the GPO. All right, so I know from many conversations over the years that there are a lot of you thinking, Matt, come on, there's got to be a way around this, right? How can I avoid this, right? What do I need to do? Well, there are not any great options, but there are a few things we can discuss here in a bit to kind of avoid it, okay? Number one, for the windfall elimination provision, if you get to 30 years of substantial earnings paying into Social Security, the WEP goes away entirely, okay? So if you can show that I paid into Social Security a substantial amount defined by Social Security, I'll show that in a minute, then the WEP completely disappears. Even if you can get to 20 years, the effects of the WEP start to shrink. So between 20 and 30 years, and then once you hit 30 years of substantial earnings, the WEP goes away entirely, okay? So what does that mean? Well, let's say you're a teacher, but you also work part-time in the summers and you earn income pay into Social Security, right? That could be applicable. You could make a part-time income paying into Social Security and then the WEP goes away. If let's say you have a teacher whose spouse is a business owner. Well, if it made sense, if the business owner could justify the income that the teacher spouse had for the business, you could avoid the WEP or mitigate it from the standpoint of substantial earnings if you can get a certain amount between 20 or over 30 to take it away completely, okay? Now, the amount that you need to hit in 2024, it does go up each year with inflation. So in the past it was lower, For 2024, 31,275 is what is called substantial earnings for 2024, okay? And it goes up each year with inflation. All right, second way. Until you start receiving your non-covered pension, or, let's say you have a 403b, 401k, you don't have a pension, but you do have a 401k for work where you did not pay into Social Security. Until you start accessing that money or you roll it over, as long as it stays where it is, or you haven't turned on your pension, you can turn on Social Security and get the full amount before you turn the pension on, okay, before you start receiving benefits from the pension. And so what I see fairly often, not that frequently, but sometimes there will be like a teacher who's going to draw a pension at age 65, but they'll turn on Social Security at 62 and get the full amount for those 3 years before they turn on the pension. It is going to be discounted because you're starting Social Security at 62, not at your full retirement age, but the WEP isn't going to affect you until you actually start receiving the pension. Okay, so that's a second way to kind of get around the WEP a little bit, okay? The third way, now this is the most infrequent. I had a guy bring it to me one time. Not that applicable for many people. But if the law does state that if your employer changes the way they elect to pay into Social Security. So you have to stay with the same retirement system, you have to have the same government job. But if they change it in the last 5 years, you paid into Social Security, then the GPO, this is for the GPO, not the WEP, the GPO completely goes away, okay? So like I said, no great ways around this by any means, but here, there are a few to discuss. The biggest one, the most common, is trying to figure out, how many years of substantial earnings do I have? Does it make sense to try and get to 20 or to 30 so it goes away entirely? And you can do that by going on to Social Security and getting your report and seeing, all of those years of earnings that you did pay into Social Security. Okay, now if you're somebody who is affected by the WEP or the GPO, you might be aware that for a lot of years, ever since these came about, there's been a lot of public outcry. There's been a lot of potential legislation that's been talked about, but nothing has ever gone through fully. Right now, there's something called the Social Security Fairness Act, and in November of 2024, it did pass the House. Okay, it was a bill brought forth before Congress. It passed in November of 2024. It would eliminate the WEP and GPO entirely. Okay, the vote was 327 to 75, showing that, hey, there is a lot of bipartisan support here. Now, the challenge is that it's now with the Senate, and there's a new Senate that will come into power in January, right? Or come into practice, whatever they say, in January 3rd. Now, in order for this to actually pass, it has to pass the Senate and be signed by the president before January 3rd. And so, is it going to happen? Well, there have been a lot of acts or bills in the past that haven't really gone anywhere. I mean, this one is a little more promising because it did pass the House with a pretty convincing vote. The one big thing, though, is, so it has gotten farther than previous attempts, but the Congressional Budget Office estimates that it would cost over $190 billion over the next decade, which, if you think about, we've discussed this on other videos, the 2034, 2035 problem that Social Security has in terms of funding benefits. It kind of goes the opposite direction. And so, is it going to happen? I don't know. I would doubt it. I think you paid into Social Security, you should probably get the Social Security. But who cares what I think? So I would doubt that it actually goes through the Senate, but I've been wrong before. All right, now that concludes our video series on non-covered pensions. Now, it wasn't that fun. So we started by really trying to figure out, hey, what is this? When does it apply? How does it affect my benefit? What if I don't have a pension, but I have like a 401k or a 403b? That was part 2. Part 3 was, how exactly do I calculate the effects of this for my Social Security? Where do I go to do that? And then part 4, we talked about the history, legislation, and is there any way around this? Well, not any great way, but there are a couple things you could try. Thanks for watching this. Thanks for sticking with us, and we'll see you on the next video.